Alright, I think we're live. Hello guys, this is my first time doing this, so you'll have to bear with me here. I will be streaming today how to model a large Moogu in Blender. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. Like I say, this is my first time, so bear with me. I will try to answer them as best I can and talk about the process. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is add a background image so that I know what I'm modeling. Right now I have a fire Moogu, which is similar to the one I want to model, but I've already modeled it. So we're going to add a background image for reference, and then I'm going to get into modeling the other one. So I need to find this guy. All right. So Jeff has provided me with a turnaround for the heavier Moogu. I'm actually going to change my window not to animation, but to default, so I got more space. Put that back. All right, where are you going? There we go. Okay, so I need to scale this down a little bit so that I can actually have the right size. And then I'm going to move it so that he's actually in the right position so I can use this as an exact reference instead of just kind of a concept. So there are many ways to go about modeling something like this. I prefer plane modeling, which is opposed to box modeling or sculpting. With a low poly model like this, I find it easier to just manipulate the vertices themselves. Although you can do it with a high poly sculpt and then retopologize later. If we have any really high topology models, I might show you that in the future if I'm streaming things, but today we're just going to be doing some plane modeling. Alright, I need to get this number right here. 6 is almost right, but 8 is too much. Let's try 6, 7. Nope. This may be a lot of just me pressing a bunch of buttons. Almost, okay. There we go, perfect. Okay, so I've lined it up. That's good. And now I need to line it up this way. Wow, okay. So, right now, we've got this mesh, which I've already modeled and unwrapped. And I would like to make one that is similar to it, except that follows the outline of this bigger guy. And I'm just going to drag this screen over a little bit. There we go. So you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. So I'm going to drag this guy away. Actually, no, I think I'm just going to hide him. And I will start from scratch so you can see the entire process. And if you have any questions, just let me know. So the first thing I'm going to do, Shift A to add a plane. And then usually what I do is name it because I will forget. And I don't know if you can see this, but over here, you probably can. This says plane 1. Now in Unity, you can't change the name of the mesh that you import, and so if you do a lot of these and you just call it plane 1, you won't be able to search anything up in Unity to find any of your meshes, and it's quite frustrating. So I'm going to name this mesh, because that's what it is, and then heavy Moogu. So that way I can search it and I can find it. Now the item in Blender, it's how Blender keeps track of it, and you can rename this in Unity, so it doesn't really matter if you get this wrong, but it'd be nice to keep it consistent, so I'm just going to call it heavy Moogu as well. Okay, so for Blender to go into actually editing it, as you can see we've got a plane right here, but I want to edit the vertices, so I hit Tab to go into edit mode. You can see now that you've got the vertices selected. I'm sorry if you already know Blender, you already know 3D modeling, and this is weird or very basic. I'm going to assume that this is all very new. So I am going to grab this and rotate it a little bit so that it's kind of the front part of the stomach. Hello. And then I'm going to divide it in half. So to divide things in Blender or to add edge loops, it's Control R. Blender is very heavy on key commands, so I will try to call them out best I can, but if I forget, I apologize. And I'm just going to delete this side because I'd like to mirror it. This guy is almost perfectly mirrored, so for the most part, I'm just going to model half of it. Now, to go over to the modifiers, you click mirror, and it will give you an exact duplicate on the side that you want. Now because I have two references, I can actually split the window itself. I've got too many panels popping up here, so I'm going to get rid of some of them. And on one side, I'm going to have it look sideways. And on the other side, I'm going to have it look front ways so that I can see both at the same time. And I can keep working. So I will move this guy so that he only shows up, I believe, on the right. And then I will shift him over a little bit so he's like that. Okay. And then this guy will just be on the front. All right, so back in edit mode, I think I'm going to start by filling out this part of the stomach. So I'm just going to grab these vertices and E to extrude and to keep moving them. So this is my favorite way to model. I find that it gives me the most control and I can get the best shape in approximately the quickest amount of time. You could sculpt, like I said earlier, although for something as low poly as this, you know, it might be worth your time to just make the mesh the first time, and then if you really need details, you could go back and sculpt on top of it. There are many ways to do this kind of stuff, and it really just depends on what you like. I feel like a lot of this is just going to be me clicking and moving. So if you've seen the first part of this, you've probably seen most of the video already. There may be a few interesting things that happen. I can't guarantee anything. So when you're 3D modeling, it's important to remember that it is more than one axis. I could sit here and model the front part of this all day and then realize that nothing looks right from the side. So it's important to keep in mind that you are actually doing this in 3D and not on one side or the other. The other way to do this would be box modeling, which is kind of what it sounds like, just taking a basic cube and then applying and stretching and squishing it to make the shape you want, and then go back and kind of edit the vertices, and you can push and pull and extrude and all sorts of stuff like that. That would work pretty well for this kind of shape. I could just start with a sphere and then work my way out, but this is my favorite way to model, so I will show you this way. The other thing is that sometimes when you get a turnaround, it might make sense in 2D, and then when you get it and model it in 3D, it doesn't quite add up. And that's where I think the role of the 3D artist is really important, because it's their job to make sure it looks good in 3D as well. The 2D artist, depending on who you are, sometimes doesn't have the experience in 3D, so it's, as a 3D modeler, it's your job to kind of fill in the gaps and make sure it looks good in perspective and not just on paper, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong, because I am just the intern, so you can correct me if I am, but that's just how I see it. I also apologize if I forget to look over at the stream. I will try my best to remember that there are people chatting. So this is starting to take shape. I have a feeling that I'm going to be removing some of these edge loops, which is this part. That's an edge loop, this is an edge loop. If you're not familiar with 3D, you need good topology, which is basically what this is. You need to be able to have edges that flow correctly for deformation when you're animating. If you have a bunch of vertices that are all over the place, if I decide to add random lines everywhere with no rhyme or reason, like this, and I hit enter, this doesn't make any sense to Blender or to any 3D program that's trying to animate it. It'll look at that and it'll go, I don't really know how to move these because they're not very uniform and they don't seem to follow any sort of flow. So you want to try to keep everything as rectangular as possible. You can allow triangles. That was something that it depends on the artist. It depends on who you talk to. Squares are the best. Rectangles are okay. Diamonds are all right. And then triangles they're not too bad. Eventually, the computer has to triangulate all of these rectangles anyway. So it will all end up as rectangles, but what you don't want is something like this, where it's rotated wrong and stretched and bending back on itself. That the computer really doesn't like that, and it doesn't like to animate that, and the animator doesn't like to animate that. So why quads instead of triangles? Okay, I don't know if I've answered that by accident, but I just saw your question. So basically, as far as I can understand, if you use quads, it's easier to set up edge flows, and just for your purposes, you can see how it moves. If I triangulate, I'll show you what I mean. If I triangulate this by adding a modifier here, let's see, triangulate, and then I apply it, I can't add any edge loops anymore easily. Oh, there you go. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so for our purposes, like I could go in and cut an edge loop out by hitting K in Blender and dragging it down here, but obviously that's quite a bit more work than if I hadn't done that and I hit R. Do you see how it forms a line now? Because it knows that's the edge flow. So the computer triangulates it after the fact, but for our purposes beforehand, we don't want it being triangulated. I hope that answers your question accurately. And I will keep going here. Yes, they do. You ask if edges can refer to UV maps. Okay, I did read that correctly. So yes and no. Edges are important for UV maps, but also for animation. I am an animator, so that largely is important to me. If the edges are wrong and they don't flow very well, you won't get nice deformation. You can take my sleeve, for example. If I put edges going down like this way, and flowing straight that way, that will be nice to both unwrap with UVs, right? Like my arm has a seam here, my cloth has a seam, and that's nice because the UV map can just unwrap on that line. But then it also makes sense for deformation this way. If I've got a bunch of loops that go horizontally like this, and I rotate this way, it'll bend very nicely. If everything was diagonal and twisting and wrapping around and not straight, then it would deform really weird because it wouldn't know how to solve that as nicely. So the idea is that you make these edge loops conform in such a way that they bend nicely on top of themselves, or they rotate in a nice way, and they're not non-uniform, or they don't make any sense. I'm trying to think of how I could show you an example in Blender. Let's see if I can do this. If I blow out some of these faces, and then I connect this and this, you can see now that the edge, oh, you got it? Okay. The edge now flows this way. So that might actually be useful if you've got something that kind of swoops down like this. Maybe you do want the edges to flow kind of like that. But if it's not what you're looking for, it's not what you're looking for. Yeah. Yeah. Topology is very important. I wish we had spent a little more time on it in school. As for me, mostly my background is kind of self-taught, so there's definitely things that I'm going to be missing that other people might be able to clarify. I recognize that I do not know all the things. As much as I would like to, it'd be nice to know all the things. Alright, so I'm noticing that I'm going to need to push the back in a little bit here, because obviously this is not lining up. So in Maya, I think it's called soft editing, I can't remember, but in Blender it's called proportional editing. It allows you to edit more than one face that you've got selected. So I'm just going to pull some of these down a little bit to fit the shape a little bit better. This is a little bit slower modeling than what I usually do, just because I'm at least trying to explain what I'm doing as I go along. So I apologize if this is very monotonous. Okay, it's kind of got the base shape here, and I need to now correct it over here. So this is one of the, like I was saying earlier about 3D and 2D lining up and not lining up. I've got this shape, and it's kind of round on this side, but it's not quite as round in this area. So trying to find the perfect balance of fitting the shape but also making it make sense in 3D. You don't want to have situations where you just drag it in and push it and pull it until you think that it lines up with the silhouette, and then you look at it in 3D and it makes absolutely no sense. You've got indents where there shouldn't be indents and divots where there shouldn't be divots. So this is kind of my job to make sure this looks right and behaves well. This is the kind of stuff that drives me crazy when I'm modeling, when, as you can see, it's getting pulled really far up. And I could spend all day making sure this looks nice and smooth, but for this tutorial stream session, I am not going to do that, and you can call me out if you see me just pushing and pulling vertices all the time and not actually doing anything. That is the temptation, is to fix stuff early. I think in anything, really, you can have that problem. I think I can connect this entire thing. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is just smooth some of this a little bit so that I don't push and pull vertices the whole time. I can just get Blender to do it for me. Alright. Now we can kind of see that's a good old circle. Now, like I say, I could have done this by just making a circle and then pushing and pulling it, but I want to demonstrate the way I go about starting on something like this. It just happens to be that this guy is very circular. He's not fat, he's just fluffy. Okay. Now, I need to check if this guy is online with my other guy in terms of face count or poly count. Blender will tell me this, but I can also just check by looking at it. Bring it over. Okay, so the important thing about 3D modeling, especially when you're modeling a set of characters that are supposed to go in the same game and serve similar functions, is that they have approximately the same textile density and then face density. I don't know if face density is the word for that, but I'm just going to use it. As you can see here, this guy's faces are kind of a little bit smaller than some of the biggest faces on this guy, but by and large, this should be alright. Because he is so big, his faces are just going to be a little bit bigger. But when it comes to the head and to the eyes especially, you can see here, this is all triangulated because I told it to triangulate. But if you check out some of these quads, which they were quads at some point, they're about that big, and I'm going to be looking for that size once I get to this guy's head, because I need more faces in this area so that I can animate it properly. If I take this and I grab it, I need all those faces so that I can have a nice smooth fall off for the bone, and so that it animates nicely. If I don't have very many faces in that area, you get a lot of stretching and it doesn't look very good. Depending on the game and how low poly it is, you may or may not be concerned with that, and especially if the model is really small, you might not notice it. So you always have to balance, for games at least, your poly count, how many faces you have in total, and what you actually need for animation and texture purposes. But I think this little guy should be okay for what we've got going on right now. And I think the other thing I'm going to do is actually just copy and paste some of this. Because these assets are actually very similar, it is possible for me to go in and copy and paste some of this. I can show you how to stitch them together in Blender, which is another really important part of my workflow. There is one thing, the triangles. I did triangulate this, and I'm kind of wondering maybe I should not have done that in this case, because I need those edge loops. I wonder if decimate would help me in this case. I don't think I can untriangulate things. No, okay. Alright, well, maybe I won't copy and paste this time. Because I've put these into triangles, I can't add edge loops. Loop cut does not work well on deformed meshes. Oh, that makes sense, but also because you have a bunch of triangles everywhere. Alright. Well, I will just start from scratch again. That is okay with me. Hide that rig. Okay. Back to the task at hand. So for his head, I'm probably just going to extrude. Come on, Blender. There we go. And scale. Now that I've got the basic edge loops, largely with the way that I work and plane modeling or face modeling, it's a lot of extruding. You'll make a face, then you'll extrude it, and then you'll make a group of faces or a line of faces, and then you'll extrude it, and you make more lines and more things, and you just keep extruding. And that, I find, is one of the faster ways to do it. Alright, so Jeff did a really good job of making sure that these areas that are important line up. Sometimes when I draw my own 3D turnarounds or my own 2D turnaround concepts, I get a little lazy and I'll put elbows in not quite the right spot, or like on one facing side the elbow will be, you know, in one spot, and then on the side view it'll be slightly lower or slightly higher. And that's really frustrating when you go to model it. So if you're making 2D turnarounds, be very careful that all your elements line up correctly. Because if they don't, you're going to have your 3D artist sitting there scratching their head going, how do I make this work in 3D? It's also kind of good to just experiment. If you're a 3D artist, to experiment with making 2D turnarounds if you don't already. And if you're a 2D artist, maybe playing around in 3D and just seeing kind of what it's like, because the more you know about what other people are doing in your studio or in the industry or your team, whatever you're doing, the more you know about their process, the better you can communicate with them, and then the better you can pass off your stuff. Yeah, I think for the most part it's just kind of fun to learn what other people are doing and what they're passionate about. Makes you a good team member if you take an interest. I'm pushing vertices again. So I keep hitting Z. I don't think you can see what I'm hitting or what key commands I'm doing, but Z toggles the visibility in Blender. That's really helpful for when you have stuff like this and you need to see kind of the wireframe of your mesh and then what the picture is doing underneath. Another thing I can do is just bring it all the way up here, scale it like this, and then add edge loops again. So matching the shape, and then I can cut in here and scale it accordingly. Now, you'll notice that right now I'm just laying out the basic blocky shapes of the face. I'm not going to go into getting the mouth or eyes done yet. I'm going to just do a basic layout of everything, and then I will change the topology to suit the face after the fact. Okay, so we're getting closer to the top of the head, and there are two ways to close off this kind of edge loop. Right now it kind of looks like a circle. Because I've split it in half, it's not selecting the other part, but if I do that, then now you can see basically a circle. And as an aside, you could close it like this, like a sphere does, where they all converge on one point, and you get a whole bunch of triangles right here, which you do something like that for eyeballs. Or you could do it the way a cube does it, if you subdivide that cube so that it's got more than one face. So notice that this still has squares on top of it, and there's no triangles anywhere. This to me is the optimal solution for trying to close off something for like a head that you probably shouldn't have a point. Depending on what you know about 3D or who's taught you or what you've learned by yourself, they're called stars or points or cat's buttholes. I've heard that term. 3D is weird. Yeah, that was my 3D professor. Thank you for that. So I don't like those, and I try to avoid them. And that just means that it's got a face that's got a vertice that has more than 5 edges converging into it. It means that it's going to stretch, and animation-wise, it's not the prettiest. Now, I've been modeling for a while, so I can see this immediately, and it might not be apparently obvious, but this area would be great to have a face go like that. So I just extruded a vertice and then made a face. And you'll notice that this is kind of how the cube did it. When I smoothed the cube and added more faces, it now moves the edge loop to come up and over, which is fine. That's what I like. So I'm going to extrude that and then make a face. So now we can see that I'm not going to converge it at a single point right, here on the head, as that wouldn't be ideal. And I think I'm going to bring this guy down, pull this guy up, and then make another face here. So now I have completed connecting that. And face. All right. So that just keeps the edge, it just keeps the edge loops flowing. Extrude the face. Yes, extrude the face. There are a lot of face extrusions in this style of modeling. Okay. Now the wonderful thing when you extrude things on only one axis is that it goes straight up like an antenna, which may or may not be what you need. And if it isn't what you need, just remember that you are modeling in 3 dimensions and not just 2. I feel like I click very much. I actually, when I got, one of my computers a long time ago, I broke the first 2 mouses I had because I was using Blender and I clicked so many times. The guy at the shop was just like, what are you doing? Anyway. So here we've got another point of contention, and this just shows you that I'm still learning things. And depending on what I end up doing, we'll see if my topology changes a little bit here. But I like the top part. This part right here, that's what I want. That's good. But here, because we've got this little floppy bit, we're going to need to change the topology. So I'm actually going to delete what I did. Forget what I said. Forget everything. And I'm going to change the way the edges flow. and maybe I'll put it back. It's a lot like programming or anything else in life. It's problem solving. You present yourself with these topology situations and then have to solve for the best, most ideal way that it could be done. And everyone will do it differently, obviously. So it's areas like this where I could do a bunch of different things. If you look at this, you could say, oh, hey, you could make a face out of that. Or you could connect this vertice, or you could make a face out of this and then continue the edge loop. Or you could just merge these two things, which for Blender is Alt-M, and continue on. Sometimes that is the correct way to go. Other times you'll sit there scratching your head going, how do I connect 5 vertices together without making a triangle? with a square and a triangle. Sometimes there's interesting solutions for interesting problems. I think that's what I want. We'll see. This is kind of my favorite part of modeling, is just trying to figure out exactly how you want everything to line up. I think you have to be a little bit detail obsessed to like this kind of thing. But if you are, definitely go into 3D modeling, because there is a lot of that. You can push and pull every vertice you want for the rest of your life, and I basically am probably going to do that. Alright. So this is one of those areas where you're going to need to put a star or a cat butthole, depending on who you are. Because if you can see, this is just not going to line up correctly for the topology I want. I would like the edge to go this way, and then to go like this, and then to go like that. I hope you guys can see my cursor. Like, that makes sense to me, but okay. Yeah, I want the edge flow to go like that, but you can see this square doesn't want to be there. It does not want to go in that direction. It just wants to keep going this way. And this square wants to keep going this way. Good. So usually in a situation like this, you just have to bite the bullet and say, yeah, I'm gonna put 5 edges to that vertice and change the edge flow. You actually can't change the flow of the faces unless you have 3 edges to a vertice, or 5 edges to a vertice, or 6 or 7. You probably don't want that many, but this is kind of what you have to do. Otherwise, you'll just end up with a glorified cube, if you think about it. Just a really big, wonky... It's not a cube at that point, but you know what I mean. It's technically got 4 sides here, and then 1 top and 1 bottom. Anyway, I digress, as I do. So I am going to extrude this out this way. Make a big old face right there. And then what I'm going to do is extrude it out this way. Pull that in. Pull this down a little bit. And then make a face. So you can see now that the edges have actually bent and are going this way and this way because of this pull. This is the basis of topology and stuff I wish I had understood a little bit better a long time ago. It's kind of stuff that you just eventually you get, but you could probably be taught this and it would make so much more sense earlier on. Okay. Oh, and I'm pulling vertices again. Okay, try really hard not to do that. So back to this. I'm actually going to reverse the view here. Now, sometimes you'll get turnarounds where the artist will give you every conceivable angle, which is nice. It also means you have to set up a lot of different windows and keep track of what the back looks like in the front. And it's... Oh, I made too many vertices there. It is good to have lots of reference, especially if you need to make a very specific character or there is not very much room, like there shouldn't be very much room for interpretation. Jeff didn't provide a back, but that's because this guy is simple enough that I think I can figure out what the back of him looks like. If you were making a model like Drake from Uncharted, you would probably need a back version. And then these guys don't have arms, but if you are trying to model something and you see the side profile like this, the arm sometimes gets in the way, so sometimes the artist will just straight up remove the arm and make it its own separate little picture so you can see what the arm looks like, and then you see what the armpit down looks like as well. But these guys don't have any arms, so we're good. We don't have to worry about that. Okay. Not 100% happy with how not round this area is, but I might come back to that a little bit later. We will see. It really is just a lot of pushing and pulling vertices that in this version of modeling, like I say, there are many, many ways to do this. This is my favorite. And Blender has some sculpting ability. It's been getting a lot better in recent years, but it's not something that I go to if I have to model something. Okay. Now, there's two different ways we could do the legs here. We could actually connect it like I've connected the head. See that these two things are actually joined and the edges flow between them. We could do that with the legs. But because of how short his legs are, the rig that I would have to apply to this might deform the rest of him pretty weird if I make the legs actually connecting and with all the edges flowing. So I think what I'm going to do is actually close this off, like the top of his head, and model these legs as a slightly separate mesh. They're still within the same object. If I tab out of edit mode and I go into object mode, Blender will still consider it part of the object, but the meshes aren't actually connected to each other by any vertex. And it occurs to me that I didn't even finish this. I'm already jumping ahead. Here is an example of when triangles are probably not the worst things ever. If I rotate this so that it matches this area, I'm gonna need to pull this down a little bit. If I rotate it so much, you'll notice that this vertex right here and this vertex, these two little dudes, they're very close together. And if you consider how small these Moogu are going to be on the screen, which I will zoom out for you, it'll probably be about that big. You are not going to notice if I put a triangle there. And as far as animation is concerned, that joint, if it bends like this, it's not going to care if there is a triangle there, right? Because if I merge these two using Alt-M, and now you see the dreaded triangle, which isn't so dreaded after all. If this thing compresses this way, right, that's okay. It doesn't mind. That makes a lot of sense to it. So there are some times that you would want to put a triangle if it saves you a polygon, or it makes less sense to have a really long rectangle there. It'll save you some of the poly count, and you're really not going to be noticing any sort of crazy detriment for having a triangle there. I could even take it one step further and make another triangle, delete that one and make this one the triangle, and just move it up the edge. Because I really don't need that much, I don't need that many faces in this area. So using your judgment, you can put as many triangles as you want anywhere, and if it makes sense to put them there, just put them there. So I will continue with this, trying to make the correct shape. The bane of my existence is pressing the wrong button at the wrong time. Might even make another triangle here. Let's see. there were no triangles, and then there were all the triangles. This stream could also be titled Maddi Ponders Things as she pushes and pulls vertices. May or may not be interesting. Okay, I'm actually going to change this to a face. I have decided arbitrarily. See, sometimes you can see something like that and you're like, yeah, that really looks like a face. Like, that's a good quad right there. And then other times you see it and it looks like this. And you see this and you go, why are there 5 vertices here? How do I make this without making a triangle? And that is, I think, one of the most annoying things to come across, is just something that doesn't quite work, just slightly, just enough that it annoys you, but just slightly. Welcome to modeling. Alright, so in doing this, I'm trying to keep these as square as possible. That's kind of the idea. If you can keep everything as square as possible, you're doing alright, because it allows you to texture it nicely and also to animate it nicely. The computers really like squares, and they like squares because they like triangles, and they like triangles because math. I'm not really sure, they just do. That's just the way people set that up. But a good square quad makes a computer very happy, and it makes the animator and texturer very happy as well. And I think this is the other thing that kind of separates box modeling and this kind of modeling, is that you get very good topology doing this. Except for this square. Literally as I say that. Bad topology. Change. There you go. Sometimes you just have to look at it from a different angle. Anyway. If you're just taking spheres and cubes and mashing them together, you'll get a whole bunch of stars everywhere, and you'll get edge flows that don't make any sense, and stuff will just be all over the place. And if you sculpt something and then tell ZBrush to remesh it, you might also get the same thing, because it doesn't care where the edge flows go, it just is putting them somewhere. So with this kind of modeling, you get so much control over where the edges go, what the vertices are doing, what the faces are doing, and you can make it so nice. I think that's what I like. It's so much control, and you just really get to put all those special details in. Okay, now I could, right now, fill this with a face. I might do that. I think I'm gonna move this down a little bit. Yeah, I like that. And then this can be its own face as well. I gotta pull this up. Yeah, I like that. Gets my unconscious nod of approval, apparently. Okay. And I turned off proportional editing, so I'm going to turn that back on temporarily. There we go. I think that's pretty close. I'm probably going to add a little more geometry around this chin area, because I'm not feeling how it's flowing there. That point doesn't really represent the chin very well, I don't think. I will get into that later. Right now the top of him is done, but move this in a little bit. Yeah, okay. So, okay, this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier about getting your points, your reference points to line up. Notice that the top of this is above this red line, but in the profile or the head-on view, it's sitting right at the line. I do this all the time. And as the modeler, which one do you pick? You could ask the artist if they're available, or you could try to find a happy medium, which is usually what I do if the artist isn't available. It really just depends on your judgment and how much end say, I guess, as the 3D modeler you have. You want to capture the idea that the concept artist has given you. But if things don't physically line up and you cannot physically make them work, sometimes you just have to use your judgment. That's why they hire you as an artist. So this is me making sure it looks good in 3D, not necessarily what the sheet says. Obviously you don't want to go wildly over what they intended, because that would be not ideal. Don't like the shape of this. Don't think that represents that. There we go. The other thing is that sometimes you just don't have enough vertices to accurately represent a shape. That's actually not the case in this, because I could just make this its own square. Right now it's not a triangle anymore. And pull this up, and then I've got a little bit more to work with. And now I've gotten the shape. But sometimes you don't have that, and with low poly you just have to find the best way that that particular vertex describes that shape. With low poly especially, you need to focus on silhouette. Silhouette is really important because you only have so many vertices to play with. You have to make sure that it reads exactly the way you want it to. So that's why I do so much pushing and pulling of vertices, is because at the end of the day, it does matter if this is here, or even here, you know? Now for Blender, you'll notice that I slide a lot of these things around. I'm glad you guys are finding this interesting. For sliding things in Blender, you hit G twice. To grab anything in Blender, to move it around, you hit G once, and to slide things, you hit G twice. So that's why I'm doing that. Instead of grabbing it and moving it around into oblivion by accident, I can slide it along its edge, and it smooths it out a little bit and keeps it from going that way because I'm only viewing it on one plane. I think with the time I've got left here, I'm gonna close this guy's bottom, and yeah, that will probably take us to the end, I think, maybe. I am doing this very slowly. Yeah, he is like a lantern right now. Okay, so this is another thing. If you're new to 3D modeling or you don't know, pretty fast? Oh, okay. To me, this is pretty slow, but it depends on your workflow. And I apologize if I'm going too fast. That's one of those things you definitely be like, oh yeah, I'm going at the appropriate speed, and everyone else is like, so I missed all of that. Could you repeat it? So forgive me if I do that, and please tell me to slow down if you need. Yeah, okay. So what I'm trying to do right now, and the reason I am extruding and then looking at it a little puzzledly, is because I'm trying to line up the edges here. This looks like it could be a quad. Like I was talking about earlier in the way I closed off the head, I think this works just fine. It's got a nice edge flow. See, look at that. Nice. Just like this. So I think I'm going to do that. And then this part can be closed off here. This part can be closed off. Not there. That's the wrong vertex. Here. And that gives me exactly 4 vertices to work with, which makes a quad, which is what we want. So that's good. Oh, I forgot to close that. Does this bother anyone else where it just goes in and this goes out? Like, it's just not quite straight. It's just a little wonky. I don't know, that drives me nuts. Which is exactly why I'm a 3D modeler, because I would sit here and fix that until it looks straight. Now, the thing about these kind of quads, where it's connecting multiple edge flows, so you see here we've got this edge loop, and that edge loop, that's all kind of connecting. And this vertice only has 3 edges connected to it. The thing about these is that if you pull this in the wrong spot, if you pull this, do you notice that this doesn't look like it knows how to shade it correctly? See how it gets kind of weird and dark, and this part probably shouldn't be dark? That's because it's doing this. That's not good. It really doesn't. Blender and literally any rendering engine will look at that and go, why do you hate me, first of all? And how am I supposed to render that correctly? So with anything that lines up kind of like this, where you've got this shape, and you've got a vertex in the middle, and all these faces connecting it, you need to make sure that that actually does sit kind of in the middle, because otherwise you will get really weird artifacts. Like that doesn't look correct from any angle. Now, there's a way to fix that if you really do need the geometry to do that, is to actually tell Blender where to cut it, and I'm actually not going to tell it to cut it there. I want these triangles to look like that. See how it fixed it immediately? Now it knows, oh right, this face is its own thing, that face is its own thing, I can render this. Which is why eventually everything triangulates, because it's a flat plane. It doesn't have any point that it can bend. Right? If you think about a triangle, it can only ever rotate, really. Whereas with this, you can have a bent quad, just like this. So I think that's why everything's triangles in the end. That's my guess. Could be wrong. And, you know, forewarned if it is. But that's my best guess. So I really want that to be in the center. That's the only caveat with that kind of square sort of setup. They're nice to close off edge loops and to, well, not close off, but like to lead them, but they can sometimes cause shading errors if you aren't careful. The other thing that I completely didn't mention at all is 5-sided planes, 6-sided planes, etc., etc. They're called n-gons after 5, basically, because we don't... Anything after 4 is in its own category. It doesn't matter if it's got 60 vertices to it or 5. It's the same category, and they're called n-gons, as far as I understand. You do not want them in your models at all, and that is one of the things that I have seen so many people coming out of school, which thankfully I didn't have too many to deal with, but that is a thing that if people see that in your models, they are like, no, you don't know what you're doing. And it's because the computer really doesn't know how to properly divvy that up all the time into triangles. If you've got a 5, like I'll show you right now. I'll take this. Wrong face. I will take this guy, drag him over here, and then let's see. I'll extrude. Okay, so right now it's a triangle and a square, and it's like, yes, I understand this. Now, if I just delete this edge, and then I make this a face. Blender didn't used to do this. It actually straight up would not let you make an n-gon. It was just like, I can't connect this. I don't know what this is. I can only do squares and triangles, which is exactly why I didn't do this when I learned, thank goodness. But if you look at this, the computer looks at this and it doesn't know whether you want it to be like this Or like this, where I drag it over here. Or like this. There's so many options, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You probably get what I mean. It doesn't know how to split this up. And it could split it up differently every single time. So if you're trying to animate this, and it's like, I need to rotate this and scale it and move it in such a way that it now looks like this, like over here maybe. It doesn't know how to break this up into triangles nicely, that you don't get that weird sort of graphical error where you've got half of it bent like this. You know what I mean? It won't know the most optimal way to do that. So that's why you shouldn't put n-gons in your meshes at all. It can divide a square into triangles, and it can take a triangle because it knows it's a triangle, but an n-gon, it's got no clue. My life is an n-gon. I feel that. Yeah, so try not to do that if you can. If you're getting into modeling, or you just kind of want to know, why don't I put n-gons in things? Just don't, because that. I hope that is a somewhat succinct answer. Probably not succinct, but I hope it at least makes some semblance of sense. That's as far as I understand it, that's how it works. And I'm sure that like a graphics programmer or someone who works with matrices and vertices and faces all the time could tell me, you silly bean, that's not how it works at all, but still don't do it. You know, if I find that out, I'll let you know. But as far as I can tell, with the logic and reasoning I've got at the moment, I think that's why you don't put n-gons in your meshes. Alright, this is one closed bean. I don't know what this looks like. Like an acorn with a ball. And it looks... See, okay, so this is one of those things where you have to look at... Silly bean. It does look like a silly bean. You have to look at it from the top, too. I sometimes forget to do that, but definitely look at the top, look at it from the bottom, look at it in perspective right now. I didn't explain that at all, but I was working in orthographic, which means without perspective. It's perfectly flat, perfectly projected without any sort of distance. But if you take your mesh out of that, and you'll notice with mine, this part juts out a little bit, and then it gets really flat. Yes, no Z depth, exactly. In Blender, I guess it's kind of Y depth, because Z is up, but anyway. Yes, you know the thing. You'll notice that this part juts out, and then this part's flat. That is exactly what happens when you model specifically from two flat pictures, and you don't take into account... You got it. You basically got it. I would say you got that, 100%. I forget what I was saying. Right. If you don't take into account the fact that it's a 3D object, you will get stuff like this, where it's like, that silhouette looks a little funky. So that's when you have to go in and smoosh and pull and do all the things that 3D modelers do to make that the appropriate shape in 3D, not just on paper. Or digital paper in this case. I apologize for the amount of times I say something and then laugh at my own joke. I guess I kind of feel like, yes, I'm definitely funny, so I'm just gonna laugh. Yeah. Well, I hope this was entertaining. I think I've got 1 minute left. I think. Right? 3:30? Yes, it is 3:30 almost. I'll just keep pushing and pulling this thing, and then I'll go back to my desk and continue to keep pushing and pulling this thing, because that's what I do. Yep. That's good to know. See, that's a little bit more round, but I'm still picking up that this spot's just a little bit too much. See, it's the end of the video, so now I can just push and pull all the vertices. Well, it's not the smoothest, but It's not too bad. Yeah, I guess that's it for me. This is actually a pretty good spot to leave off. There we go. I say as I touch up a few more things. But we've got part of the mesh, and then I'll continue with the legs, and eventually I will get to the eyes, which means I'm going to be deleting these faces and retopologizing it, adding more geometry the way I did with this part of the head. Same process, just different things. And yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will hopefully see you next time. Yeah.